Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You know, Stacy, I was thinking about back in the 1980s, the leveraged buyouts of those days and the idea of going private. This will all become germane to what we're speaking about.
Well, 50 years later, remember, we're heading right into the 50-year anniversary of the Great Reset of 1971, which was the Nixon shock when President Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard. He announced it late at night on a Sunday night, August 15th. August 16th, we were off, right? So we're yet again starting another great reset, I believe. And in this reset, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. They've already told us what it's going to be, right? For every forced seller, there's a buyer, BlackRock. So this is a Wall Street Journal article that I was referring to here, Max. Under the eviction ban, many smaller landlords have struggled to collect their monthly rent checks, and some have gone into forbearance on their mortgages. So we're extending yet again this moratorium, perhaps illegally, according to the Supreme Court. And, a lot of the smaller landlords are not having a good time of it because obviously they haven't been paid for over, 14, 15 months now. So they're defaulting on their mortgage.
Right. So to get back to my 1980s analogy of the leveraged buyouts and going private, during that time it was Drexel Burnham Lambert and Michael Milken, and they kind of invented the original issue junk bond, and they terrorized boardrooms across America by tapping into the pension fund market and buying out companies that would, quote, go private, right? These are publicly listed companies. They would be go private. Say it, Ron Perlman and other corporate raiders, as they were known, were out there gobbling up. So now flash forward to 2021, and here's Blackstone essentially taking America's real estate market private. And they're using similar accounting tricks and financial machinations in the form of 0% interest rates available only to them, and then getting their government buddies to foreclose on property owners by concocting a scandal and a pandemic-related policy nightmare, and in effect stealing, like they did in the 2008 subprime crisis, like they did post Hurricane Katrina in the Ninth Ward in New Orleans. You let the Wall Street people in and they steal everything.
You mentioned Blackstone, and they are indeed a huge private equity firm in the residential real estate market across the world. In particular, I was pointing about BlackRock. BlackRock is also really getting big into it. They're the ones buying up 80,000 homes at a time at the moment. Of course, they are the recipient of a lot of this largesse of the federal government at the moment. They have not only former executives in the Biden administration and advising the Biden administration, but they've been tasked with allocating a lot of the billions and tens of billions and hundreds of billions of dollars of funds that are flowing around all over the place. And so let's also go to the Treasury Department, because this is another boondoggle of the past 50 years, the place we find ourselves in during this great reset at this moment. And my question, by the way, Max, before I get onto this headline is, you know how Nixon announced on a Sunday night that we were going off the gold standard? Do you think it's going to be a Sunday night that something dramatic happens as well, with perhaps we're introducing a CBDC tomorrow morning? Everybody, you're going to have your own bank account and a little Fed account in which will deposit these free tokens for you.
Right. Well, we saw that during the 2008 crisis when Lehman was closing and Bear Stearns was collapsing. They got together over the weekends and they did their big announcements on the Sunday night. Remember, the helicopters were flying in from the Hamptons, and the big announcements were rolling out on a Sunday night before markets open. But since that time, markets have become more globalized and more leveraged and more hypersensitive to information happening every second of every day, 24/7, 365. And you have now the Bitcoin market that never shuts, hasn't shut in 12 years. So I don't know if they're going to be able to sneak the dead fish under the noses of folks like they used to be able to.
Well, I think people are going to be extraordinarily happy to have free money deposited in their Fed bank account. Every normal, ordinary citizen is going to receive this. It's not the banks. The banks will, of course, for every 10,000 they give you, they'll give them 100 billion. So that's the way it works out. But it'll be something that I think people will go crazy for. I think the markets are going to spike. I think this Sunday night announcement, the Biden shock that might happen soon, I think that's going to be something that people will celebrate in the streets before it all collapses. But Treasury Department to invoke extraordinary measures as Congress misses debt ceiling deadline. This happens all the time. It's a nonstop partisan show, clown show of like, oh, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling and all that. But the thing that stuck out to me about this was that they mentioned that, this debt ceiling that is always an emergency. We're never going to make it. Oh my God, we're going to default on our debt. Well, the limit, a facet of American politics for over a century, prevents the Treasury from issuing new bonds to fund government activities once a certain debt level is reached. That level reached $22 trillion in August of 2019 and was suspended until last Saturday. So 2 years ago exactly, Max. The new debt limit will include Washington's additional borrowing since the summer of 2019. The Congressional Budget Office estimated in July that the new cap will likely come in just north of $28.5 trillion. So that's 30% increase in the national debt in 2 years, exactly.
Right, well, the problem of the debt ceiling is that it forces them to admit what that number is. So like M3 or M2, which were the money supply numbers, once the numbers got so scary, they stopped reporting them. Similarly, with the debt ceiling kabuki theater that happens every couple of years, they're just going to get rid of it. They won't even announce that number. It'll be impossible to find what the debt of an American is. It'll just say a number, the sign for infinity. That's it. That'll be the number, and that's it. We're at the end.
Well, Max, we may literally be at the end here, but when we go out, we're all going to be billionaires. So it's good news and bad news that I'm delivering here. Asteroid heading towards Earth is filled with so much precious metal, it would make everyone on the planet a billionaire. Of course, we'll all be wiped out, but we'll take it with us. We'll all be billionaires at death.
Well, that's a very optimistic view. The meteor will bring a shower of gold. We'll all be billionaire from the meteor. I think that was the thinking of the dinosaurs at one point.
True. We've covered this before, that NASA's launching a mission to study a nearby asteroid worth more than $10,000 quadrillion, which is said to contain so much precious metal that everyone on Earth would be a billionaire if it returned. And after discovering Psyche 16 in March of 1852, which is when this asteroid was discovered, the 124-mile space rock will be the primary focus of NASA's project, which is targeted to launch in August of 2022. The spacecraft would arrive 4 years later in early 2026. So going back to my last comment about a Sunday night shock, like they're saying that it's going to come near us in August 2022, next year, this time next year, like they're prepping us for us all being billionaires. In the meantime, they're going to print some CBDCs to make us all rich. These are central bank digital currencies. You'll see on a Sunday night, they'll tell you, Joe Bag of Donuts out there, you're going to get a couple $1,000s deposited every week into your Fed account.
Right. Well, it's not all bad news, because my understanding is that Goldman Sachs is packaging a Meteor Gold Reserve collateralized obligation bond that they're selling to pension funds to the tune of many hundreds of trillions of dollars. In the event that the meteor does hit planet Earth, they won't have to pay off the bond. If the meteor misses Earth, then they will claim that they shorted the companies and the pension funds that were invested in these bonds to the extent that they net would have still made money. So Goldman Sachs will still make money whether the meteor hits planet Earth or misses planet Earth. This
in particular that's coming for us is an asteroid, not a meteor, but the asteroid is nestled between Mars and Jupiter, they say, and it is believed to be the remnants of a protoplanet destroyed by hit-and-run collisions when the solar system formed. The thing I want to point out about this is, of course, we keep on seeing aliens, asteroids, absolutely free money. No matter what, there's going to be some sort of emergency which will justify us all becoming billionaires. We're all going to be billionaires. It's all going to be that Oprah meme where she's like GIF, where she's handing out money to everybody. Everybody gets $1 billion. So it seems like there's nonstop chaos from the deepest history of our solar planet constantly being thrown at us, whether it's aliens, asteroids, or absolutely free money. And it's all coming for us on this 50th anniversary week of the Nixon shock, when the U.S. went off the gold standard, and we've had 50 years of nonstop, absolutely free money, free credit printing, free money, free money, free money for all.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's all coming together. So you're suggesting that there's a cataclysmic cosmic brouhaha, which is deteriorating our species orientation with the universe as that's understood, and that we better buy Bitcoin? Is that what I'm hearing?
Brouhaha. Well, actually, Max, you did say years ago when we first started making this show that the black hole of debt. So it makes sense that that black hole of debt, and black holes pull in everything, right? So we're pulling in the aliens. I bet you these aliens that are here don't even want to be here. They were sucked in by this black hole of debt.
It's like, beep, 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 beep. Captain, the black hole of Earth's debt is pulling us toward Earth, the stupidest planet in the galaxy. No, don't. Retro rockets. No, they're increasing the debt ceiling. We're getting pulled in to Earth's stupidity vortex. More Bitcoin. Right? Well, that's the way it goes. The solar system can be a dangerous place. Right, and then we beamed up to frothier norms out there, and then apparently the universe smells like a cappuccino. Scientists have told us there's no a latte. So in case you're stranded on a foreign galaxy and you smell a latte, that's not your local coffee shop. That's the smell of outer space. Well, thankfully we're going to take a break in about 5 seconds, and when we come back, there's going to be much more coming your way. So don't even think about thinking about going away. Stay right there. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to Mitch Feierstein in Scotland. He is, of course, of PlanetPonzi.com, author of book by the same title, Planet Ponzi. Mitch, welcome back.
Wonderful to be here, Max. Hope everybody's doing well.
Yeah, everyone's doing great. Now, we got the 50th anniversary of the Nixon shock. The good, the bad, the ugly of 50 years of fiat. We've seen it all. How will you be commemorating the 50th year anniversary, Mitch? Will you play a celebratory round in the honor of President Nixon?
Probably. Tricky Dicky began the biggest Ponzi scheme in history when he decided that currency debasement and printing unlimited quantities of money would be good, because the debt now has gotten so far out of control that we have no other options but to see it a precipitous decline in the US dollar. We've already declined substantially. When we decoupled from having fiat currency correlated to a tangible asset, that was the beginning of the end. And then in 1999, as we progressed, when Larry Summers and Bill Clinton decided to change the regulations for the banking sector so that derivative products became wildfire. We let children play with derivative toys they didn't understand. And that is why everything has spiraled out of control right now. And we're in the mess that we've gotten into 50 years later.
Well said. Now, Stacy suggested in the first half that we might see another Sunday night surprise. And that was what the press called the surprise announcement by Nixon on a Sunday night to close the gold window. She was speculating that this Sunday night surprise might be the U.S. Fed announcing a new global central bank digital currency. Your thoughts?
Well, I'm sure that they don't like Bitcoin. I'm sure that the central banks don't like a currency that they can't control, but they've already destroyed the value. If you go back to 1913, which is coincidentally when the Federal Reserve first started, which is not a federal entity, it's not a bank, and it's no part of the federal government. It's owned by JP Morgan and the member banks, Goldman Sachs, and all of the other banksters. So the issue that we have here with the digital currency controlled by central banks is, which is what they want to do when they're trying to get rid of the $100 bill or the $500 euro note. They don't want notes. The government wants the ability to have central planning so that if you're not a good apparat check, they can shut off your bank accounts, cut off your privileges, put you in a mask, and not let you do anything ever again. So will they announce that? Well, the dollar's declined since 1913 when the Fed started, about 98%. So it's only got 2% of its value left. Reserve currencies historically, going back to the beginning of time, only last about 100 years. We're at about a little over 100 years on the US dollar. Before that, as many people know who watch your program, sterling, the British currency, Great British pounds, were the reserve currency before the dollar for over 300 years, which was an anomaly in history. Now, what we're seeing now is the bread and circuses that you traditionally see at the end of empire, when currency is totally debased. That you had this happen in Rome when they had silver based, and then they decided to sell all of the precious metals that the currency was based on. And that's when you saw the fall of the Roman Empire. We're in a similar situation now, except it's worse, much worse, because we've got trillions of dollars in debt. Interest rates can never go up because, Max, you're not going to believe this, but you can never taper a Ponzi scheme.
Right, exactly. Now, going back a few years, there was a rumor that central banks would offer negative interest rates, or that negative interest rates would come around, and people scoffed at this idea. Had you on the show, and you explained that it was well within possibility. Then we saw negative rates, and we saw the damage that negative rates can cause. And people said, well, it's just temporary. You were suggesting that, no, it could be more of a permanent basis. Then there was a conspiracy theory out there that we'd see negative rates hit retail banking accounts. People would get money taken out of their accounts. And people said, no, that's not ever going to happen. You were suggesting that it probably will happen and that it could become a protracted situation. Okay, newsflash. Germany, almost all the banks now have gone negative savings rate. They're taking money right out of people's accounts, and every single bond on the German yield curve is negative interest rates. What's your comment?
It's a program that I mentioned on your program first. It's called Steal from Savers. So what they want to do is eviscerate the prudent savers out there and reward extreme risk by the bankers who continue its bailouts for billionaires. And it's an endless cycle until this explodes. We have runaway inflation, which is probably around 20%. And they're telling people that there's no inflation. Now, when you look at real interest rates, Max, they've been negative for quite a while. Although it might look like there's a small interest rate, when you look at the actual inflation rates and you look at the actual rates that they're paying, it's negative. It's real negative interest rates, and they've arrived and they'll be here for quite a while. And one of the most consequential reasons for this, Max, is because, as you know, the debt has spiraled to close to $270 trillion, and they just keep issuing more bonds, which they are monetizing, which is the worst possible thing and will end in hyperinflation. And I think people are talking about deflation. You might have temporary deflation, but you will eventually have hyperinflation. And the central banks are the root cause of this problem. And people need to wake up and realize that the same people, you keep going to the same people who created the problem for the solution, and that's never going to work out. People need to wake up and see that there's a massive problem with debt. Corporate debt has never been higher. Valuations in every market and every asset class are so overextended, it's more than 1929 and the dot-com era in 1999, and the bailouts just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You know, the next crisis, what they're going to do is blame it on a crypto attack or on some kind of internet attack, and say that it was a foreign actor that did it. That's why they need to take action against future attacks, cyber attacks.
Of course, when people see the dystopian landscape the finances are in all over the world, they seek safe harbor. And so they rush into something that's been around for 3,000 years that they know will preserve their purchasing power, and we should see skyrocketing right now, and that's gold. But gold is actually it's over the last 10 years, it's down 3%. Mitch, what happened?
Actually, gold has been, the precious metals complex, it's been manipulated by the Bank of International Settlements, who last night intervened in the markets again. They come in and they dump massive amounts. I mean, eventually you'll see once we get above 1950 in gold, you'll see it take off and there'll be no offers. I mean, some of the precious metal complex is trading close to production cost. So it's the only actual asset class that's undervalued or fairly priced right now. It's actually cheap relative to what everything else is, and the ridiculous, absurd, astronomical valuations caused by asset class hyperinflation. Thank you to the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, and the Bank of England by money printing. And they tell you that inflation is transitory. It's not. It's here to stay. Inflation is around 20%. They're lying about the numbers, and they're just changing the preferences and the basket from which they disingenuously calculate their basis for inflation.
So historically, the inflation numbers going back to Paul Volcker's days, when we saw inflation like we're seeing today, he jacked rates up to 14, 15%. But the rates in the U.S. are under 2%. And so how is that possible? And will we see rates finally go up, Mitch?
I think that an exogenous event will cause interest rates to rise, but that's when the U.S. is going to have to default on its debt, because when they won't be able to, when interest rates rise, there's so much debt that the U.S. owes now that it will be impossible mathematically for them to repay it, because the interest, even a small amount, if it gets above 2% or 3%, will just be too much for them to service the existing debt that they have. So they've got to come up with some bait and switch idea or cyber attack or something, COVID, whatever they can blame it on, they're going to blame it on, but they're not going to say it was because of our bad policy. Have you ever heard a politician or a central banker admit that they've made a mistake?
No, I mean, if you just look at the recent COVID crisis, the need to introduce something at, quote, warp speed, et cetera, is due to the very, very fragile nature of the global economy that's over indebted. And so there wasn't the usual precautions and time taken to develop something that had been traditionally worked. So we end up with something that is experimental. And that has to do with the world being in a lot of debt, and that you can't interrupt a Ponzi scheme. Not only can't taper a Ponzi scheme, Mitch, but the velocity at which the tapering, at which the Ponzi is being accelerated, right? It's an accelerated Ponzi scheme. The only thing at warp speed is the amount of this Ponzi scheme growing and causing instability all over every aspect of the economy. Now, your book, Planet Ponzi, kind of says it all, really. I mean, this is the definitive text on this whole phenomenon. How long can the extension and the pretension last? So you're looking for an exogenous event to justify a radical policy maneuvers or a bond collapse. So in that, which comes first, a bond collapse or gold breaks free from the shackles of manipulation and starts to trade at a more market value?
Well, I think that what we're going to see is it's impossible to tell the top of a bubble, but I think what's going to spark this tinderbox up is a liquidity crisis. And I don't know which market's going to suffer from a liquidity crisis. It might be stocks, and it might be ETFs, which we've spoken about before. And ETFs are the devil's tool, as I've rightly said. So as a market goes up, it's fine to buy an ETF, but when markets try to liquidate all at once, it's a basket of stocks, there's going to be no buyers. So when the buyers fall out, the Fed can't bail. Most 40-year-old bankers today think that the Federal Reserve's job and all central bankers' job is to keep markets buoyant, keep the stock market higher. Even Janet Yellen thinks that that's what their job is. And they can't do it anymore. They're out of bullets. So when you run out of bullets, you have a big problem. And this is where we are. We're about at the end of the road. I think this autumn we're going to have some serious market declines, precipitous declines. And I think we haven't seen a correction. All we've seen is a bull market for 12 years of this temporary emergency measures with the Fed. If you look at the velocity of money chart, the M2 chart that I've showed, it demonstrates every time they've come in and they've put money in and pumped up the markets with this, they've just nothing. The banks have held the money. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. And in the lower right-hand quadrant, you see where we are right now on this chart, the M2 money velocity chart. So it doesn't work. Ben Bernanke's thesis that this is going to trickle down and create aggregate demand doesn't work, but we keep going to the same people and they can't fix it. We need different ideas. We have to stop the groupthink, and we've got to get out of the bad debt that we're in right now.
Right. Well, you're in Scotland, not far from Edinburgh. We have about 15 seconds or so. Will you be visiting the grave of the genius of modern economics, Adam Smith?
Nah, I'm up north. I'm north of Inverness right now, so we're pretty far from Edinburgh. So I think I'll pass on that one.
All right, fair enough. Well, I went there, and it's totally uneventful. It's overrated. All right, Mitch, thanks so much for being on Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. Want to thank our guest, Mitch Feierstein, author of Planet Ponzi. Until next time, bye, y'all.